This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss Richard Matheson's 1961 short story, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, and its Twilight Zone adaptations. So James, I want to know, when was the first time that you remember watching The Twilight Zone?
I can't even tell you. I feel like I've been watching it forever. It was definitely just I caught it on TV at one point.
Was it the original black and white, or was it like a newer version, or?
It was the original, yeah.
Do you have any like particular episodes that you remember as a kid that
the one with the pig faces.
The pig faces, yeah, that's an infamous episode, beloved, I think. I remember the guy who breaks his glasses and can't read for all eternity or whatever, right? And he's like, no.
Yeah. That's a massive one. That's huge.
Classic. One of the other iconic ones.
And so is this one.
Is this one. Now, what's funny is I had never seen the original adaptation of this story. The one that I remember was in the Twilight Zone. I believe it was in the Twilight Zone film. And it starred John Lithgow as our main character here, and that scared the shit out of me as a kid. I remember that being really scary. Like, the monster looked really good, and just really, they really got that goblin sort of gremlin thing going on, and it was striking, and it was a very like close to that character, psychosis almost, and the paranoia of no one listening to you. And I just remember that being just really affecting to me. And this, covering this and reading this, brought it all back to me.
Yeah, and it makes air travel scary, right? Like, people are already on edge when they're dealing with air travel. But
I don't think I'd ever flown on a plane, but as soon as I did, I immediately thought of this. Like, it's like Jaws, like going in the water. It's like as soon as you get on a plane, like, you think of this story.
If you're next to the wing and you don't say there's something on the wing, then you're doing it wrong.
Which is funny because I don't think he actually says that. Yeah, he says there's a man on the wing. There's
a man out there.
Yeah, I think the something on the wing maybe does come from that John Lithgow one. I'm not sure. I kind of do want to go back and rewatch that, honestly, because now I'm curious. Because I thought we were going to get something more like that with the new one, but not really. We won't spoil it. So how we're going to do this episode is we have read the original short story by Richard Matheson, and we have watched the original version from the Twilight Zone that he actually wrote the screenplay for. And then we went and watched the 2019 new version. Jordan-Peele, executive producer. I know he has a hand in writing all these episodes, but I don't think he solely writes them. I know you looked into some of that, so we can talk about that as we get to it. But we're gonna save that for the last half-ish of the episode, so that if you haven't seen that and you don't want to be spoiled, you can wait, and we'll definitely like let you know when we're gonna spoil that episode. But there is going to be full spoilers for the classic 50s version or 60s version and the original short story.
Yeah, maybe we can even do the film version as a bonus episode or something at some point.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I definitely need to rewatch it because I feel like I only have that memory as a kid, which I will reference as we go forward. But yeah, it's not fresh. But I am curious. Hey, before we do get started, though, I wanted to mention that we are in the middle of doing, well, not in the middle, we have just announced fairly recently that we're doing a giveaway for Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. And we're doing it leading up to the release of the new Amazon 6-episode miniseries, which we will be covering. And we're going to be reading the book and covering it as our next project. But if you would like to get a copy of that novel, we have 6 copies we got from the publisher that we're giving out. We're giving out 2 on Facebook, 2 on Twitter, and 2 on Instagram. You can enter on all 3 places, and you can only win once, but if you enter on all 3 places, that's going to greatly improve your chances. So check that out. Find us on social media, Ink to Film. We're all over the place, and look for that post. Oh, and real quick, one more thing. We are actually launching a YouTube channel. It's going to be just search for Ink to Film on YouTube. We're going to be posting our back catalog of episodes on there, rolling them out over time. Definitely check it out. We also might do some bonus content at some point. We haven't really decided what exactly that'll look like, but yeah, we're excited about it, and we're on YouTube now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great platform. I listen to podcasts on YouTube, and, there's a lot of podcasts will have like a visual element to them. I don't think there's any plans for that anytime soon for us, but
who knows?
Who knows what we'll do on there eventually. So
yeah,
we're getting that set up.
We'd love to see you subscribe. It'd be cool. And one other bit of news, my story, Always Dawn to Forever Night, has actually been selected for an anthology called The Best Vegan Science Fiction and Fantasy of 2018. And it's out now. So if you want to look for that online, you can find it. I'm honored to be included on that. I think it's cool. It's kind of a niche little anthology, but I think it's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Congratulations.
All right, man. So I think the first thing we should do is I should tell you a little bit about Richard Matheson. Do you know anything about this writer?
I think he's written other things that I'm aware of.
Definitely.
But
yes.
I can't. Yeah, I can't pull what he's written right now.
Yeah, that's fair. So Stephen King, who we have covered many times on this podcast, has listed Matheson as a creative influence of his and says that his novel Cell is dedicated to Matheson. And George A. Romero cites Matheson's work as an inspiration for A Night of the Living Dead. Explicitly, the film version of I Am Legend is something that inspired Romero. So I Am Legend he's the author of that novel, which was adapted, and we might cover it at some point, in that Will Smith movie.
Well, there must have been another adaptation.
Yeah, there was an older adaptation, yeah. Now, Anne Rice has also said that Richard Matheson's short story, A Dress of White Silk, was an early influence on her interest in vampires. She went on to write Interview with a Vampire. He's had a lot of influence on horror, and there was an opening in the Kindle book where Stephen King likens Matheson to the Elvis Presley of horror. And he says that now a lot of people will rightfully point out that Elvis Presley didn't invent rock and roll, that there were people who came before him and a lot of big names, but says that he believes that Matheson's influence on the horror genre is as significant as Elvis Presley's is to rock and roll. So that's high praise coming from Stephen King.
I wonder if there are any other adapted, like any of his other short stories or works were adapted into Twilight Zone.
I have a list. Well, I don't know about Twilight Zone, but adapted period, yes. So he has written. He wrote the screenplay for 16 episodes of the Twilight Zone. He also has adapted his 1971 short story Duel as a screenplay directed by Steven Spielberg.
Yeah,
for a film of the same name. 7 of his novels and short stories have been adapted as motion pictures: The Shrinking Man, Hell House, What Dreams May Come, starring Robin Williams, Bid Time Return, filmed as Somewhere in Time, A Stir of Echoes, Steel, filmed as Real Steel, and Button, filmed as The Box. And the movie Cold Sweat was based on his novel Writing the Nightmare.
Wow, I mean that's not only just horror. So it seems like he's successfully written other genres that were adapted as well.
Yeah, and he won he's won like World Fantasy Awards and stuff too. So yeah, I think some of this stuff is considered kind of dark fantasy or just straight up fantasy for sure. So yeah, a very long career. He died in 2013, so actually not that long ago. Yeah, he's really kind of a horror and genre icon. And it's interesting that this is the first time we're covering him, honestly, with all these adaptations. I see a bunch of stuff on that list that we could end up covering.
Yeah, that'd be cool to revisit.
Yeah, this will be our first little taste of him, though. Now, I have read I Am Legend, and I've read some other short stories by him, and I'm a fan. I like his writing, and I'd be excited to read more of it. But this is my first time reading this short story. I'm assuming you hadn't read it before either, right?
No, I hadn't. But I have read I Am Legend as well, actually.
Oh, you did? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk about that another time. But I want to know what was your thoughts about this short story and his writing style and all that, since this is our first time covering him on the podcast, at least.
I didn't know what to expect. We were just really I just knew that we were covering a Twilight Zone episode, and then I was like, oh, it's based on based on existing material, so let's check this out. But I have to say, I was really, really taken with it. I really liked it. The way that he sets up the scenario and like the tension that's in there, and you know, there's a couple different beats that we can talk about. You really feel the character's sense of, I guess what I'm trying to get at is you feel how heightened he is at multiple times throughout the story. Like, it seems like just getting on the plane, he's already, you know, he's already like extremely stressed, and you really get that in his interactions and the way that he writes about his inner monologue.
Yeah, I mean, he uses prose that implies sort of like a danger, you know, and how uneasy Wilson is here, our main character, and he's gripping the seat with like clawed hands, and he's talking about the plane is like a lurching, lumbering leviathan that's spewing smoke and like all this stuff, right? Like it's described as monstrous, and it's setting the stage for what's to come with what is essentially a monster story. And I think also what you're picking up on, and for me throughout the story, was how sort of paranoid and frustrated he was, that like he couldn't convince anybody that what was happening was real, and how everyone assumed that he was like losing his mind, and how just like maddening it is. I think that's like an identifiable fear, like the fear that you wouldn't be believed is a scary thought. And you know what would happen. And then I also just want to say, like, this is one of the most iconic plane stories for a reason, right? And it's a fear bound up in being on a plane. And we talked about this a little bit, I think going all the way back to when Emily Savedo was on and we did Jurassic Park. We had some talk about liminal spaces are like good places for stories. And I feel like a plane sort of qualifies as that. Like it's a weird space. And it's something we all recognize.
But it's like taken up a notch. Like it's taken to the next level because there is that existing danger just being up in the air where humans shouldn't be.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then it's all a place we've like most of us have been and we recognize, but it's not somewhere a lot of us go a lot, right? Like it's something we do every now and then. And it always feels like just a bizarre piece of life to actually go flying into the air. And I think he totally capitalizes on that bizarre feeling and plays off of that.
Early in the beginning, and we definitely get this in the adaptations as well, but that no smoking sign and kind of having to wait until the no smoking sign went away in order to smoke, like however, you know, he smoked like three cigarettes in a row. It's just like there's
what a different time.
Right. Oh yeah. Not to mention what a different time. And even in the first adaptation we're going to talk about, they had like the cups that they were bringing them on the how weird were those cups that they were bringing
weird
them on
paper
the plane?
Cups. Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. I mean, I was actually curious. I was sitting there thinking like it would have been fun to watch this one with you, because as I was watching that early adaptation, I feel like we've gotten better at disguising the fact that this is being filmed, right? In modern day, like there's a lot more trickery to disguise it as real life. But you could tell this was being filmed much clearer. I mean, it doesn't help that we're watching it on TVs it was never intended to be watched on. So you can see way more than you ever should have seen. But I was just like curious about like what your thoughts were, like the filmmaking that we were seeing back in the 60s for the Twilight Zone, and how different it is than what we see today.
Yeah, it's and that's just like a developing of the art, you know what I mean? As different tools and different techniques come along, they're just building blocks. But what, in a word, I would just say formative. Like I was, as I was watching it, I just felt like I could see the fundamental like foundation of where things were going to go for like a monster story or something like that. It just felt like it was just so much fun too. It's something I wanted to talk about, but we'll get to the adaptation in a second.
Well, I feel like we can kind of talk about the two interchangeably. For one, you know, Matheson wrote the screenplay for the adaptation, and it's very faithful, honestly. There's a few things that get changed, I think, just because of the logistics of like trying to film it back then, and they had to change it. But it was like as much as he could keep the same, he kept the same, right? Yeah. And you know, there's a few things here and there, but one of the things I want to talk about is how in the story, at least, now I don't think this is true in the show, and so this is a change. He has a gun that he's brought along with him because he's been having suicidal thoughts, and it's like in an envelope or something in his bag, in his like luggage. Yeah, and this
is wild to me too, because there's a couple of things that are like kind of talked about here. Which one, the idea that he's suicidal is adds even more tension to that character. It's like, is he losing it? Is he not? Like kind of a unreliable narrator type thing going on.
Yeah.
But then he also, there's a couple lines about like why he carries it also for like teenage gangsters and like whatever else it was, like to protect himself from, I forget what else he said, but it just like
that's what
what a
he
different
said.
time.
He tells himself that's why he carries it, but he knows that he really carries it for a different reason, and he just lets that kind of hang.
That scene in the lavatory, as they call it here, but the bathroom, it's tense too. And like I was wondering where it was going when he got in there, because he had to like wait for someone to leave in order to be able to, like, someone, it was occupied. And then once he got in there, he's like stressed out and like leaning up against the wall and like sweating and freaking out.
Yeah.
And then we see the gun, and I was like, holy shit, like this is a different story than I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and so the short story is even more internal than we get in the original adaptation, because all of this is going on in his mind. He's alone. He's not with his wife, whereas they do add the wife character in the adaptation, and he's kind of wrestling with his own inner demons. Whereas they give him the other characters to talk to about it on a show just to get it out there, and that makes sense. But I liked that sort of really personal, because it furthers the isolation of not being believed, I think, in some ways. And we should say, like, where we're at in the story right now, he sees something on the wing, and I do love that there's a line in there about how fighter pilots in the World War II used to call them like goblins or gremlins or something that they would like see on their planes, and it's a really clever way, and like King does this all the time, and you gotta wonder if he was inspired by Matheson. But he uses like real world legend and myth to link to something to make it seem like, oh, maybe this is actually something that could happen, right? Because instead of just being a monster on the wing that has no precedent, it's like, no, there's actually this, people have talked about this sort of thing happening in our real world, and he connects it in that way, makes it feel more real, right?
It's almost laid in there as if it was just something to think about, that's just a little fact, like a little character moment for him to like flesh him out as a character, and then who knows if it'll actually pay off, which most savvy readers would know, obviously that's going to pay off to something. But if you're, I don't know, I guess if you're not paying very much attention, it could just go by you, and then you're like, oh my god, you totally set this up.
Yeah. So we got to talk about the difference in how the monsters look, though. I think that's one of the biggest things has to be discussed. So in the short story, he's described as being like bird-like and kind of gaunt, and have like this like cunning smile and like an intelligence he can tell, and it keeps like flying away and flying back down in this like really unreal way. And I remember, like, I was thinking of the movie adaptation that I saw where this was convincingly portrayed, and it was genuinely scary, and then I was just busting out laughing when I saw
it's so good, right? Isn't it
the man he's like in an ape suit, he has a giant belly for some reason. It's so goofy looking. And then whenever he like comes off, like you can see the strings, and he just floats away in like a really silly way. Like,
so good.
It's so good. And it's amazing to think back. Like, people were genuinely scared by this, and like I get it, because it's like you don't have any comparison point to, like, and this was like groundbreaking at the time probably, but man, did it look ridiculous.
It's so good. Oh my god. I want to be that for Halloween, by the way. The little gremlin on the wing. Oh my god,
it's so good. Such a good.
The face is really what does it for me, though.
He's got like it's like an ape face, but it's got like mascara on it or something, or not mascara, but like eyeliner like around its eyes, and it's like kind of twisted in a way, but otherwise it looks kind of just like an ape mask. It's really bizarre.
My favorite moment is when he looks at the wing and it like just gently lands, and you can just basically see the strings as it lands.
No, I could see the strings for sure several times in my viewing.
Good. I love it. I mean, it's like, clearly it's funny, but it's still effective in some sort of way, in some campy way. But
because the character reacts to it, and we're connected with him. Which, by the way, William Shatner, we should say. Like, this is a very young William Shatner in this role. I don't know where this lines up with Star Trek, but it was cool to see him in there. Young Shatner doing his Shatner
and to get into if we're kind of switching gears to talk about that a little bit. The director of this is Richard Donner. Early days Richard Donner, young Richard Donner, who would go on to direct Superman.
Oh, okay.
Like the original Superman, which as far as a superhero movie is concerned, is like got to be the gold standard for a very long time.
Yeah.
He also directed Lethal Weapon in the 80s.
Oh, cool. I love Lethal. I love Lethal Weapon, even though it's definitely an 80s movie through and through.
It is. Yes, it is.
But so there was something I want to shout out in the short story that I really liked. There's a moment where Matheson has the main character thinks that there's a cat or a dog that got stuck on the wing, and he thinks of it like losing its mind in terror as it's on this wing. And to me, that was such a like terrifying thought of that being the possibility. He quickly realizes that's not what it is, but these kind of small moments build, because it builds this like unease and like this feeling in you of like, oh, this is really horrible. And that's why the short story is, as far as like a horror piece, is more effective in my opinion than what we get in the original adaptation. But and it's because I think, like this kind of writing is timeless. It's not beholden to budgets or anything. Like it's just knowing how to convey things to other humans that can be effective. And so I can read this today and feel like I learned something from it, and that's cool.
And you said, we talked about it with just the idea, the concept. We've talked about this before, like the idea of like Jurassic Park. Just you're saying like you're bringing back dinosaurs and you're putting them in a park. Like that's a fantastic idea for a story.
Right.
The idea behind putting somebody on a plane and having something be on the wing. That's like, and
nobody believes you when you see it and you tell them no one believes you. Yeah.
But the
thing is, it's like the structure of the story is so perfect as it builds, right? Mm-hmm. And we can feel where it's headed.
And it's one of these weird situations where even if you hadn't read the story and you're not aware of it, I feel like if you get on a plane, you think like, what if something was on that wing? Like it's one of those weird moments where like I think it's like a universal thought that people have. Yeah. And then he just took it and made it into a story.
Or it's like when you look out the window at the wing, you're looking at it and you're like, what if I see something that's not supposed to be there? Like that's a scary thought, right? Like what if I see something
pulled off?
Yeah, like or like the engine like flashes or something. Like what if I see something? That's a scary thought, right. And you can totally and you're right, because like it's a great setup. The idea of this character with seeing something on the wing and not being believed, and the fear of that. Like you start from that point, and like the story almost writes itself, in my opinion. It doesn't. It just feels effortless. But in some ways, it kind of does, because like. It just kind of plays out in the logical way that it should. It feels right to me, and that's escalation, right? So we get more and more. We get him. He closes the curtains and he tries to sleep, and then he throws them open, like finally frustrated that he's done. He's like, I'm gonna look. And he throws it open, and it's right there, pressed against the glass. And I remember how terrifying that was in the movie. And here it's funny because the thing looks so silly, but it's frightening in the story too. And it's a scary moment because the thing's right there looking right at him. And that's the other terrifying thing. Like, he's not just observing this thing. It's observing him, too. It is aware of him. And I remember that is like a deeply unsettling as well.
Well, definitely. And then the idea that every single time he gets somebody over there, which in the adaptation, it's like I think they linger a little bit too long on moments when he's not looking. Yeah,
they're like having a conversation and they all finally dramatically turn and look at the window and it's gone.
Yeah, and you're like, of course it's gone. You gave it a minute and a half. It's just good. And like I think, although even, I don't know, trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who saw this when it first came out, I think even if he looked a little goofy and a little like, it's clearly a guy in a suit, even if that's the case, the idea that something was on the wing pulling panels off to damaging the plane is still scary. And
I feel like air travel of that kind was newer back then, right? So I think people had a lot more fears about flying than we do today, where we've kind of grown more used to it. Oh, so another thing there's a couple of things here that just fully put it in a different time, and one of them is this passenger being like crazy and angry, and them pulling the pilot back to come talk to him personally, and it just felt to me like really like if somebody's being dangerous, you don't take the pilot out of the cockpit and have him come talk to him personally and like try and calm him down.
Right. Well, they kind of, I mean,
maybe they would back then, but I just feel like you wouldn't do that now.
I just mean like in the newer adaptation, like the captain shows up, so
something similar happens. I want to hold off on talking about it though. I don't want to spoil that for people, but you're right. And we can talk about whether or not that's realistic. But yeah, okay. So let's further along the plot here. So things are escalating. The monster starts doing damage to the plane, and he starts deciding, like, I got to do something about it. He thinks about his gun. He's like, I'm going to shoot this thing because we're going to crash. And I'm the only person who is in position to do something about it, right? So he finally gets the gun, and he's going to shoot it, but then he realizes that it could like ricochet off the window, and the glass is too thick, and it probably wouldn't hit the thing. So he pulls the emergency window, I think it is in the story, emergency door in the adaptation, and he just like, his like shoulders and head get sucked out, and then he, like, while he's dangling, out there, he fires the gun at it, hits the thing, knocks it off the wing, and then blacks out. And then the story ends with him waking up on a stretcher, and they're kind of drawing him out, and they say, like, oh, it's the craziest way I've ever seen someone try to commit suicide. And then he's like, well, they're gonna find evidence that the panel was being messed with, and I'm gonna be vindicated. And that's essentially, it's all in his head and him thinking that, and then that's the end of the story. And there is a difference in the show, because in the show they do pull over and you see the panel lifted up, and then you add the added element of the narrator, the Twilight Zone narrator, which also changes things. So we can talk a little bit about that.
And honestly, just to talk about Twilight Zone in general, like it's extremely important to me. It's one of those, I put it on all the time. It's just like a comfort show for me. And I just think it's so much fun just to see some of these stories that would, inspire so much. And Rod Serling, I mean, Jesus, the guy is just an absolute icon. And this episode is iconic. William Shatner's overacting as usual is iconic.
He sits incredible. Up. He sits up at the end in the stretcher or whatever. He like sits up and he like looks at the camera and he says something like, "They will find it" or something, like, I don't know. Just he really overacts at the end there, just to, because I thought he did a pretty good job throughout, but then that moment was just way over the top.
I mean, his reactions, especially for the time, were wild. They were like his. I mean. Which sold the creature being that unfathomably scary.
Yeah, it's a moment that would elicit extreme emotions. So I guess in that sense, like it was okay, but I don't know. There was something just very like stagey at the end with him sitting up in the stretcher and talking to the camera.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the change of him, like, acts like he dropped his cigarettes and like leans and takes somebody's gun on the plane.
That's true. He takes the gun off of somebody else. But so I think it is interesting to think about the Twilight Zone and how that frames this story, because this story is not a Twilight Zone short story. It was written before. It's just a horror story. Whereas you bring in the framing device of the Twilight Zone, you have a narrator like kind of stepping into frame and talking about how he doesn't realize that his flight has taken a direct path into the Twilight Zone, and then at the end he kind of steps in again and talks about it to like do a little wrap up piece. It does take away the psychological element that is present in the story before, because there is no actual proof that what he saw was real in the short story. It may have just been all in his head, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that to your point, I think that makes it more of an internal story, but I think that in terms of conveying a story, especially at this time, for a TV show, I think they made the right choice, because that I think showing the plate up and having people be like, maybe it really was real. Yeah. It kind of leaves you with more questions than if you knew, like, oh, it kind of seems like it was all in his head. Because I think from the story, I think it was all in his head, in my opinion.
It's an open question, right, for sure. Yeah.
But this is more concrete, how crazy is that actually was happening, but nobody believed him. He was everybody thought he was the boy who
and
crumbled.
Like the Twilight Zone is the answer ultimately, right? Because the question for the Twilight, it's like, why isn't any of this happening? Because it's the Twilight Zone, and that's like the answer to all of it, right? So it is interesting how it kind of reframes that story in a way. So I forgot to ask you this at the beginning, or maybe I did. You had seen this episode before?
Yes.
Okay. And had you seen the movie I'm talking about with John Lithgow? Have you seen that?
Yes. Yeah, but it's been forever since I've seen that. Yeah.
Okay. Just so I know where we're both at. It was fun to go back and see this thing, and I'm actually really glad I did, because it is referenced in some significant ways in the new adaptation. So if you're ready, I think we'll move on to that. Had a lot of fun with this story in this episode, and if you're curious about the new one, I think we'll start out by discussing it in non-spoiler ways, and then we'll get into some more spoilers. But yeah, so the new Jordan Peele vehicle, Twilight Zone, CBS All Access adaptation. We had to sign up for All Access to even watch this thing. That's another whole discussion. I think it's a really dumb way to do this, but I see what they're trying to do, and I'm frustrated with it. But we did it, and yeah, we got this new version, and from the jump, it is slick. It is modern. He's got earpods or iPods in his ear, whatever those things are called.
AirPods, yeah.
AirPods, thank you. He's getting scanned in this like really futuristic looking scanner. I forget the name of the actor, but isn't he like Ben from Parks and Rec?
Yeah, Adam Scott. He's great.
Yeah. And so he's our main character in this one.
I do have thoughts about this casting though.
Okay, so what do you think of the casting of him?
So I love this guy, and I think so. If you've seen like Big Little Lies on HBO, he was in that. I think he's a great actor, and so that's not to take anything away from him, but I think that because he's a comedic actor a lot of the time, it maybe just in the back of my mind like some subliminal thing was telling me like some of the things that were going on were supposed to be funny, or maybe a little more sarcastic, or like it just seemed like there was a little tongue in cheek, and I don't know if that was intended or not, which we can talk about.
I mean, it's tough because a lot of comedians or comic actors seamlessly have great dramatic performances, so it can be done. You can get over that, I guess, that issue.
I think that it may have also added something to the performance, because it's like the idea that he can be on like 1 second he can be like charming, funny, witty, and then flip and also be a dramatic actor. That's a huge plus. I just felt like there were times where I was like, if this was John Lithgow or like William Shatner, it might play out differently, which he clearly isn't. And this is a new take. Ultimately, I like the episode, and I think he does a great job. I just wanted to say, like, I felt like it was weird casting, which I usually am for weird casting. But it just something about it.
I mean, it's not that weird. He's still kind of a middle-aged white dude. So in some sense, they kept it pretty.
Oh, I didn't.
Pretty close.
I just meant
sense.
weird in the way that like this is like a pseudo horror kind of story, and it's like they're not casting somebody based on that. They're just saying like, let's get a great actor and cast them.
Okay, I mean I can get that. I didn't have that problem with his performance. I did have that, and this is more of a overall Twilight Zone thing. I struggled a little bit with Jordan Peele. Now I know he's an incredible director of horror, but I've seen so much Key and Peele that when he shows up doing almost kind of an impression of the same sort of character from the original Twilight Zone, the announcer character, I keep waiting for him to crack a joke. I was like, he can't, but he plays it totally serious. And I think over time, if I watched more episodes, I'd probably grow to be fine with it and not have that problem. But for this episode, I was like, I kept looking at him like, is he going to crack a smile? Because obviously this is kind of silly, but he never does,
He had like a brow furrow at one point that I felt like was a kind of a little wink and a nod, like maybe, because I agree with you.
You're right. He kind of raised his eyebrow like,
there was a bit of that for me as well. And like you just said, he I mean, incredible horror director, respect the hell out of him. And, I've loved him in Key and Peele for years. But like you said, there's just this instinct in me where I felt like it was like maybe he was going to crack a joke. But like I love it. Like I love Jordan Peele as the new like announcer. I think it works.
I love it
but
too.
I did,
and I honestly think if I watched more episodes, I think that problem would probably go away.
And I think maybe he's playing with the idea that like audiences might think that he's going to crack a joke, and like maybe that's like something to his performance there. Like I don't know. Maybe he's using it.
So I think we got to break into some spoilers here because we have to talk about just how different this story is. So we are going to spoil the episode now. So if you really want to watch the new version, going fresh, stop it now. All right, we gave him the chance. All right, so there is no monster on the wing in this version of Nightmare at 30,000 feet is what they call this one. Instead, we get a awesome speculative element in a podcast that the main character listens to that narrates the disappearance of the flight that he's on. And I thought this was an incredible idea. I actually really loved it. It felt weird that this was called Nightmare at 30,000 feet, though, because it almost is a completely different story.
That's exactly what it is. It's another story, and then you just say like, oh, it's on a plane, so we can reference. Because I mean, that's why it's not called Nightmare at 20,000 feet.
It's called Nightmare at 30,000 feet.
Right. So it's like a reference thing, and like, I don't know. I like the premise, the idea that they're changing it up. I was still expecting the entire time for there to be a creature on the wing, and when there wasn't, it was like, oh.
And he keeps looking out at the wing, and they keep showing the shot of the wing. So I think we're supposed to be expecting it. Like, is it gonna when's it gonna come? And at a certain point, when I kind of realized it wasn't coming, I got kind of disappointed. I was like, oh, I guess we're not getting it. But I was liking the story they were telling. I actually really liked the conceit of that. Like, I feel like that's like a very modern story, and it's something I've actually had a thought about in the past, like listening to something and what would happen if it said something that was like currently happening and you were watching it, like how like it would feel so bizarre and scary, and that's exactly what happens. And I love the way they dealt with that.
Like right now, I see you, Roger. I'm looking at you right now.
Yeah.
If there's a Roger listening, I'm looking at you right now.
Yeah. Put that down, Jeremy. Just see if we happen to hit anybody.
Yeah. So I think my main thing is that if this wasn't called Nightmare at 30,000 feet, I think I like that they were playing with the elements and like, you know, subverting expectation. But I think if it wasn't called that, I may have even enjoyed the episode even more, just because I was expecting to see a creature. And it's almost and now I'm like, oh, what's a modern Nightmare at 20,000 feet look like? You know, a retelling again with a creature and all. I don't know.
I think it looks kind of like the John Lithgow version in the movie. That's why I was surprised to hear they did this, because I was like, what more can they really do with this thing? You know, because I felt like that was a really, really good version of it. So I guess I'm okay with the change. It was a little weird to try and like recalibrate and realize that we are going a whole different route.
Well, that's the thing. After covering the source material and after covering the original, we were both primed to compare. And it's like, how do we compare this? There are things here and there, but thematically maybe, but nothing like plot wise.
Yeah, I think the main way is, like you said, kind of thematically and character wise, because this is all about a person who's having a crazy experience that no one believes and only they know about. That thing is theoretically endangering the plane, and he takes it upon himself to try and do something to avert the disaster that's imminent. So in a lot of those ways, like that's all the same, right? Like all those elements line up. It's just how it plays out is very different. There's a couple of nice twists. I really love the sort of, which is funny because actually it's kind of a callback to the original story. There's like a young woman across from him in the other aisle who keeps looking over. And I remember that happened in the short story, but didn't happen in the 50s adaptation. So I don't know if that was supposed to be sort of a reference to that. But then I love that she ended up being the air marshal. I thought that was a really cool twist.
So good. Did you see that coming?
No, I actually didn't. I didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
Did you?
I love
did
that.
You predict it?
No, I didn't. I loved it.
I
didn't see it coming. Yeah.
I kept thinking that the weird guy was going to end up being one, which is what we were supposed to think, right? Like the guy who he's having this conversation with, like who is this guy and what he wanted and why. To me, is also like, why does he believe him? There's a couple times where it felt like characters were behaving in ways I didn't really believe. And one of them was like, this guy seems like so ready to believe him that he is listening to a podcast about something that's happening right now. And he's like, yeah, I'm totally in with it. Which made me think he was like a figment of his imagination or something. Right. I don't know, man.
We knew something was going on with him. We clearly, like, obviously he was like end of the episode, clearly like something was going to pop off. I got to talk about this because this is something that I think they played with well, but I want to get your take on it as well. There was definitely like racial profiling being used as like a lens for us to watch the episode through. It was like making me cringe. They were showing shots of people wearing like a headscarf or wearing like traditional garbs and large beards, and like clearly they were like trying to set up some sort of like terrorist thing in our head, and then the guy who we thought maybe was like a figment of his imagination or something was really quick to talk about terrorists. So it being post 9/11 and having it be a flight story, I guess you can't really get around the idea of talking about 9/11, but the specific like the lens racially profiling people was like making me cringe, which I think was done on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I think we're some of the cringe because like was it handled perfectly? I don't know, but I do think the attempt is to play off of the very modern fear of, is there a terrorist on this plane with me? Which everybody has. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing that people think about now when they get on a plane. And that's terrifying. And they were trying to play with that. And yeah, is it handled really well? I don't know. But it's not egregious. It's not bad. It's just like it is kind of cringy in some ways. I did think that they were kind of cavalier with the pilot coming out to speak to him. I thought, like, who is this guy? This can't be the pilot. And it's like, no, this is the pilot. He's coming to talk to him. And I know that there are other pilots in the front, but like this guy, someone a passenger behaving erratically and possibly dangerously, you keep them away from the pilot at all costs. I feel like, I don't know. I just didn't buy that part of it.
Yeah. I don't know the protocol for like if a captain would ever leave the cockpit and come back and talk to somebody. I don't know for sure, but yeah. It does seem like it would be in your best interest to kind of handle that guy on your own and figure out like what his deal is.
Yeah, and then, I mean, like the flight crew should be able to handle it and not have to have the pilot intervene. It just seems to me. Yeah. So we see the main character. If you're listening to this, and we probably should describe what happens. He runs around. He's like interrogating different people because the podcast keeps saying there's people of interest on this flight and it's like a true crime podcast kind of being described as like, here's what we know leading up to the disappearance. And it has like time codes. And it's like at this hour, this message came about. And then there was a video posted to social media. That was a cool moment because he gets in an argument and they yell at him to go back to his seat because he's like harassing these two guys. And a bunch of passengers take video of him doing it. And then he goes back to his seat and he sits down and he puts on the podcast and it says that, you know, at literally the time it is right now, there's a video uploaded to social media that he's like, probably everybody has seen. It's the most notorious thing. And it's a recording of what just happened. And
really like the use of popular culture right now. Yeah. The idea true crime podcasts are massive. And the idea that one could be unfolding in front of you is like, I hope this isn't the last time we see that kind of.
Yeah. And you're at the center of, you know, podcast is such an early, in its infancy kind of art form that these sort of like almost like an interactive podcast in some way could exist, you know, and some sort of ARG situation or something. And it seems like there's a lot of potential for this kind of creepiness and telling stories that at least play out in similar ways. It makes me want to try and write something like this. Honestly, it's cool.
There's a couple little things built into this episode, but one of the things that I really liked was the podcast that he was listening to was voiced by Dan Carlin.
Oh, that's why that voice was familiar.
Isn't that cool? Like they went and got Dan Carlin, legendary podcaster, to be a podcast in this episode of the Twilight Zone. That's awesome. Dan Carlin does hardcore history.
Yeah. We should say, so also he finds like this device. It's like an older looking iPod that he can't use his AirPods on. He has to find like a plug-in one. And he just finds it in the back of the seat in front of him, or sitting on the seat that he gets. And he also like changed seats with somebody on his way in. So there's some sort of like eerie things that happens there that I liked, and like how he ended up getting it. He did give up really easily on not having anybody else listen to it. That frustrated me because he asked the guy sitting next to him to listen to it. The guy says, "Nah, man, I don't want lice or whatever," and he leaves, and we never see that guy again. Where the fuck does he go?
Right?
Does he just go sit somewhere else? I don't know. It's bizarre. He's like, so this guy won't listen to it, so oh well. But then there's like several other opportunities where he could say like, listen to this and let somebody else listen to the thing. I don't know. And he never does. He never tries again.
I agree. Yeah, I was kind of hoping he would try a little more. And the other thing was, I was like, just stop listening. Like, there's part of me that just wants you to just stop listening.
No, dude, you got to keep listening. I was with him. I was like, he's got to see what happens next. Like I was bought in on the idea that he would just like keep coming back to it. It's like not looking out the window. You know what I mean? Like
right.
in the
no,
like,
I mean I get
there.
I get that that's why they did that. But the idea, like if that started happening to me, I would be like, okay, well, let me stop and see if 10 whatever 10:15 comes around.
Yeah, but as you're sitting there and the time's ticking by and you're thinking about what if there's something that could be revealed if I listened. What if it is going to happen and I just sit here and do nothing? Like that kind of thing. I don't know. I feel like you could talk yourself into it, you know?
But like I'm trying to talk myself out of it because I'm like, what if I'm playing into the Twilight Zone right now? Like, what if I continue listening to this and that's what kills me? And it's not necessarily the this isn't necessarily fate.
Teach their own, man. I think I would listen to it, honestly.
Which begs the question, do you think that this is like has something to say about fate? Like, do you think that this is like maybe there's like something wrapped up in fate here?
It did seem like they were trying to do something thematic with like the past is the past and the present. I forget what they even say. Because he had been talking to his therapist about it. And this like really ties into that, because it's like the past isn't the present, but it seems like it is on the. I just wasn't sure what point they were really trying to make with that, and I don't know if they ever really made one. So all this leads up to, we got to finish out the plot here. All this leads up to our main character, who he's a journalist in this, not the same character, it's a different name. He's a journalist, and he's trying to investigate what's going to bring down this plane. He knows that it's supposed to disappear from radar at a certain time, and that time's drawing closer and closer. Finally, he talks to his friend, this guy that he met in the airport and has interacted with a few times, this kind of creepy guy sitting in the back of the plane. And the guy's like, yeah, I believe you, man. He's like the only one who's believed him, so he's really relieved. And so they start talking about it. He's like, what can I do? And he says, well, if I could get into that cockpit, because he says that he's a pilot, this guy. He says, if I get into that cockpit, like I could fly this thing and I could prevent whatever disaster is going to happen. And so he says, like, oh, yeah, you should do that. And he's like, well, it's got a code and I don't know how to get in there. And then he thinks, like, I know what it is. And so this number, 1015, has been repeated a few times. Like, that's the number of the flight, the time the flight left at, and something else. And
the time it crashes.
Yeah, the time it crashes. And so he's like, it's 1015, which seems like you wouldn't.
The code.
Seems like a terrible idea to put the flight number of the flight as the code to into the cockpit. But who knows? Maybe they do that.
That's having your password as password, by the way.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And so he tells the guy, and he's like, all right, I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to like shut down like cabin pressure so that everybody passes out. But he gives him like an oxygen tank so that he can stay awake.
All right. I got to talk about some of this real quick. Yeah. So the idea of his character being okay with him like shutting off the air basically would imply that he's like, yeah, I'm gonna be able to just knock them out, they'll all just fall asleep, but they're gonna die from lack of oxygen, right? You can't go to sleep from lack of oxygen without that eventually killing you unless you get the oxygen back. So he was not thinking at all.
In my opinion, it kind of starts to go off the rails here a little bit. I agree. It's and he agrees to this way too easily. We've seen him pushed by no one believing him, but I feel like we also haven't seen enough proof that the thing that he's afraid of is actually going to happen. You know, like he needed something more, I think, to push him into this moment where he trusts like this guy to do this thing,
like a creature on the wing or something.
Yeah, I don't know. So this guy, for whatever reason, seems to be a real person. And he gets the code, he goes up and he unlocks the front thing and he goes in, and then there's also a thing where like the cockpit is being broadcast to the entire plane on this flight, they say, which I think is just kind of that like a lampshade of like, yeah, this isn't a thing that I don't think planes do, but we're gonna do it here. So everybody sees him come in and like he beats the shit out of the pilots and takes the thing, does the thing where he makes everybody pass out, and then he's like talking to our main character directly and like thanks him for his help. And then he says the line, good night, New York, which was supposed to be the last thing that was said by the plane, which is eerie. And it's this guy, and our main character's like, oh God. And so this is all going to lead to what I feared, and I actually created it. So it's kind of interesting, like time travel almost kind of thing. Like you create the thing that you're afraid of. Right. And so maybe that ties into their themes. And then he like lets go of the wheel, and we see the plane like dip and dive. And then I think it goes to black. And I really wish the episode ended right here.
I was going to say the same thing. Well, and for me,
even with the slight problems I had, I really wish it ended right here.
I would have been great. It would have been kind of Twilight Zone-esque, but I guess adding that one little thing at the end of the original maybe had them thinking like, oh, we should add one more little twist here at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I almost feel like just having him get on the island and be like have to live with the fact that like it was because of him, and then he has to live out his days on the island, and he knows from the podcast that nobody's ever been found. So
yeah, he's never been found, and it should have been he was the only casualty. Although that whole thing, I don't know, man. The idea that an entire plane could crash in the ocean and everyone survives and is okay.
It's the Twilight Zone. Yeah.
completely unbelievable. It's the Twilight Zone, I guess, is the answer to a lot of this. Man, like I still like I feel like we've kind of grown up as a society for our storytelling, and we want things to hold together a little better. And that just didn't seem real to me. I do like the idea of like him being missing, and yeah, like you said, like he listens to the podcast and it says that so and so, the journalist, the infamous journalist, was never found or was never seen again. And that would be a really chilling ending, right? He'd be stuck on this island knowing that he's never found. So there's no chance of escape. I think that would be a dark way to end. But instead, all the passengers and crew are there on the beach, and they all kind of show up as he's listening, come out of the woods and stuff. And they just all like dead-faced walk at him and then just start beating him, and they beat him to death, I guess, at the end of the episode, while Jordan-Peele shows up and talks a little bit about the Twilight Zone. And I guess they're beating him up because they blame him for what happened because he let the guy in. But my question was like, how do they even know that he's the one who gave him the code? It's not like he said that to anybody. It was just so weird. They're like, it makes no sense, honestly. It just makes no sense.
Yeah, I just I get what they were trying to do, but where I think we both agree it should have ended was either cut to black, that fade to black at least, and then or have him wash up on the beach. And I honestly just like not even having a second episode in the iPod or whatever it was, just having him like on the beach, knowing, because they had talked multiple times about how like it disappeared and nobody was ever found. And then it wasn't until the follow-up episode that he got on the beach that he realized that like, oh, everyone was found except for him, as like
that discounts what was said in the first episode of the podcast. Is very, very
but
weird.
it's supposedly like a passage of time like has happened or something, or like something weird has gone on where like another episode has been released, like a very recent episode, and they're like, oh my god, since we last talked everyone was found.
Update. I don't know, man. It was bizarre. And then I definitely do want to shout out, there was an Easter egg for the original version, which I'm sure you saw, right?
Loved it. Yeah, I want to get that teddy bear, the little snuggly guy.
It's a little snuggly creature. It's a little snuggly teddy bear version of the man in the ape suit. Like, it is the man in the ape suit from the original episode. He's among the luggage on the beach, and he comes floating up, and it was a nice little homage and nod to the original. Yeah. Like, honestly, if we could edit some of the changes here at the end, like, it could still have been really good. It just, this episode really lost me with like believability of the way people behave, and it was nearing that at the end of the sort of hijacking that happens. But it completely crossed that when we got the end where all of the people gang up to beat on him. Because like ultimately, what did they see? They saw a guy saying like, something's wrong, this plane's gonna crash, and I know about it. And then the plane crashed. So why are they all mad at him? He was trying to warn them. Like, it just is so weird. I don't get it.
Yeah, I think they were. Yeah, I think they lost the thread a little bit, where they were like, the audience knows that he was the reason it went down, but like clearly there should have been like another connective tissue that let the rest of the passengers know.
Yeah, because they didn't.
You know what I mean? Like, right. One thing I wanted to talk about that was kind of, I mean, look, I like this episode. I honestly think that, and I hadn't watched any of the new stuff up to this point. I think that I'll check them out. I think I want to, because it's just fun. I just like the Twilight Zone, whatever version of it that it's back. I want to check it out. But something funny that I wanted to say was the most unbelievable thing to me was the size of that fucking airplane. When he's like walking around, he's got
the aisles.
He's got like
the aisles,
huge. And like, I don't care how big of a plane he's on, whatever transatlantic or whatever he's flying, like that's a big ass plane, and like, just, it looked better on film, but that was a huge plane.
Yeah. So I think there's like a campiness to Twilight Zone, and it's very aware of it. I mean, it has an announcer like walk up onto the beach and talk to the camera, like it's campy. It knows what it is. And so I think they decide that means that gives them license to just go for broke with the kind of ridiculous endings. And I think it's unfortunate here, because I think it does kind of like take away a little bit from this story. And my worry is that they do this throughout the series. I hope that that's not the case, and that some of these other ones don't go for that sort of campy end. But this felt like it felt like they went for camp rather than like a serious story.
Yeah,
which they could have gone.
I'm gonna try to remain undecided for now as far as the show as a whole. Like, I want to check it out and see what I think. But I do want to talk about one major thing that I feel like has to be addressed. How much of this show's revival and this episode and everything that went on in it did you feel like is a response to Black Mirror, which is, you know, an anthology that clearly came in the footsteps of Twilight Zone?
You know, honestly, I wasn't thinking about that, because to me, like, the tone of it was just very different in a lot of ways. I don't know, though. The podcast thing does kind of feel like something that could happen on Black Mirror.
Yeah.
So I can see why you'd make that connection. Honestly, it wasn't something I've thought about yet, so I'd love to. What were your thoughts?
Well, I just was thinking, like, you know, as soon as I knew they were remaking Twilight Zone, I was like, well, I mean, Black Mirror is wildly successful right now. A lot of people are really into it. And I think that show is really fun as well. I just think the anthology, I think these fun little mini stories are so much fun to tell in anthology series like this. And I think Charlie Booker is the one who is over the mastermind over there for Black Mirror. And I've liked a lot of their episodes, and most of them are like really, really great TV. I think that it was the right time for Twilight Zone to come back, because this idea that like Black Mirror had primed an audience for anthology, horror, sci-fi, weird off the wall stories. I think it was the right time for it to come back. So I hope that they can, like, you know, just maybe get a couple slam dunks in here somewhere, and people get on board with it.
And maybe there are episodes in here that are, you know, we've only watched the one.
I think I don't even know how many episodes are currently out. I think these two were dropped at the same time, I think, and then I'm not sure how many more are out. So yeah, it looks like it is ongoing.
Okay.
3, 4, 5, 6. It's currently on episode 8. Will come out in a couple of days, so that'll be interesting to track. I'm gonna have to go back and watch some of these episodes.
Well, we still have CBS All Access for now, so we can watch some more.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. So I think that's a good place to finish this thing up. We are going to be back next week for Good Omens. That's going to be a multi-week project for us as we cover both the book and the show. So we invite you to join us. It looks really cool, in my opinion. Back with Neil Gaiman, who is a favorite of ours. So I'm excited for that.
If you made it this far in our coverage, I hope that you check out the original Twilight Zone. Check out some of the new Twilight Zone stuff if you're interested in that. It was fun. It was fun to visit this. I hope we can somehow revisit Twilight Zone, because I just absolutely love it. And then I'm really excited to move on to Good Omens.
I bet there are other episodes that were adapted from written work. So I think it's possible we could. Yeah, definitely. So also make sure to participate in that giveaway if you are interested. We also wanted to thank Ben E for being a patron. You have really helped keep this show going, and a big shout out to you. And if you wanted to find out how to become a patron yourself, go to patreon.com/ink2film, and you can find out what sort of bonus content we have on there, which is a full year's worth of monthly bonus episodes right now.
Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at ink2film. And join our Council of Inklings on Facebook.
And another way to help out this podcast that costs nothing is to leave us a review wherever you found this episode, and let us know what you thought of it.
Thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts. And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's it for this week. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.